We have had a really great week this week. We've been in Ezra, Nehemiah, we've been in Haggai, we've been in Zechariah. And we made some mistakes and we addressed those mistakes. And so Ezra, remember, it is really, when he's talking here in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, this is episode 204. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, Ezra is recounting for us almost like a historian what's going on. And that's going to be the case through Ezra 1, 2, 3, and 4. In Ezra 4, he's going to give kind of this whole inclusive history that's going to take him all the way through Nehemiah. And so Ezra 4 covers, it's been forever since I've looked at it. I should have looked at it. I apologize. It's about 70 years, something like that, or more, even covered in chapter 4. And then in Ezra 7, Ezra finally shows up on the scene. But the people of God under the reign of Cyrus, at the end of the 70 years, they go back to Jerusalem and they begin to lay the foundation. They begin to lay the foundation for the people. For the temple of God. The people begin to lay the foundation. And so they're keeping the Feast of Booths. It hadn't been done in years. We see that through Nehemiah as well, that it hadn't been done in years when the Feast of the Booths was done. And so they begin to make these burnt offerings for the Lord. They give money to the people, and they begin under the leadership of Zerubbabel, who is the governor, the acting governor of the time, and Jeshua, also known as Joshua, the son of Jozadak, the high priest. And so the people begin to build the foundation of the Lord. And then what do we get to? We get down here to the end of chapter 2, and we see that the people who had seen the temple in its former glory are weeping, and the people who had not seen the temple in its former glory because maybe they had been born or grown up in Babylon are rejoicing that the temple of the Lord is coming to fruition, that it's going to be built. Now, in Ezra 4, we see that there was opposition to this, and the people tried to stop the building of the temple of the Lord, and they were, in fact, successful. And the temple of the Lord does not get touched. Only the foundation has been laid, and the temple of the Lord was not going to be touched for several decades. And then we jump to the second year of King Darius in episode 205, where we meet Haggai, the prophet, and he comes to the people and he says, is it really time for you to build your own houses and live in paneled houses and to work on your fields when the house of the Lord of God lies desolate? And he reminds them that you've harvested much, or you've sown much but harvested little. You eat much but you never have enough. You clothe yourself but you're not ever warm. You put wages into pockets with holes. And he goes, have you wondered why you haven't been blessed? Have you wondered why I've withheld the rain from your land? It's because my house lies in ruins, and each of you busies yourself with your own house. So he goes, you have not done what I have asked you to do. And he says, therefore, build the house of the Lord, rebuild the temple of the Lord, and I will establish you as a people. And so the people hear this, they repent, they're grief-stricken, and under the teaching of Haggai and under the leadership of Zerubbabel and Joshua, on the 24th day of the 6th month in the second year of Darius, they begin to rebuild the temple. And then they're going to continue to do that. They're going to rebuild the temple. It's going to take them about 3 years and 8 months to finish the temple of the Lord. And he says, because you're doing this, I'm going to bless you. He reminds them first, Haggai reminds the people, he says, look, our forefathers sinned against God. He sent us into captivity. But if you will do what's right, if you'll serve the Lord, if you'll rebuild the temple, then he will shake the nations and bring people back to Jerusalem. He'll shake the nations of all the people and all the gifts and all the treasures, and he will bring them back to this temple, and he will make it have what? More glory than the glory of the days of Solomon. And so speaking to the last days and the coming of the Lord. Then we're going to jump back to Ezra. And so this is where it talks about them rebuilding the temple. And Tatanai sends a letter to King Darius, and he says, hey, these people, I asked, he's a tattler, remember? Maybe, yeah, Tatanai, tattler, that works. So he's tattling to King Darius. These people, these Jews, are rebuilding the temple of the Lord. I asked them who they were. I asked them what they were doing. They've said that Cyrus, king of Persia, said it was fine. Can you go back and look in the records, see if Cyrus ever allowed for that? So the king, Darius, does go back. He looks up. We see this in Ezra 6. He does go back and see that Cyrus had said, yes, rebuild the temple, and that the temple should be built with certain specifications. And not only that, but the temple should be paid for out of the pocket of the empire of Persia. So he tells them, he says, look, here's what I want you to do. I want you to make sure that the cost is paid for these men, anything they need, and whatever they need for burnt offerings, down in verse 8 and 9, whatever they need for burnt offerings, be sure you provide it, and then ask them to pray to their God for me, the king, and for my sons. And so the temple was finished, and it was dedicated in the name of the Lord. Then we jump forward to Nehemiah. Nehemiah comes after Ezra. So you have Haggai and Zechariah who come and they're prophesying to the people in Jerusalem. And then Ezra comes and then Nehemiah comes. And Nehemiah, this is episode 207, Nehemiah is a cupbearer to the king. Let's see, let's jump down here here we go. Chapter 2, verse 1, it was the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. Nehemiah is the cupbearer, the one who puts the wine into the cup in the hand of the king. And he comes before the king one day in chapter 2 of Nehemiah. He says, he's appearing sad. And the king Artaxerxes says, well, you're not sick, so why are you sad? This can't be the sadness of anything but heart. And Nehemiah says, look, the city of Jerusalem, the city of my fathers, the walls are still destroyed. The whole city's been devastated. I want to go back and fix it. And so he does, and he's going to be gone for 12 years. And when he gets back, he ends up walking around. This is Nehemiah chapter 2. He walks around the wall. He kind of evaluates it. Like, where's the wall broken down? Where is it burned? Where is it dilapidated? What do we need to do? What's the work going to be? And then he comes before the people and he says, God's going to make us prosper and we're going to build this wall back. But immediately there's opposition to them. Sanballat is in opposition to him. Tobiah is in opposition to him. And they keep trying to lure Nehemiah away from the work so they can put him to death. Nehemiah doesn't fall for it. So they eventually decide to come and attack the people in Jerusalem. The people in Jerusalem hear about it, and they're laboring with one hand and carrying the sword with the other. The people who are doing the actual building are working while they are kind of guarded by these other people who have the swords and the spears. And they work during the day and they guard at night, and they don't even take off their clothes, and they don't ever drop their weapon. They keep their weapon in their hand. For how long did they do this? For 52 days. That's how long it took them to build the wall. The opposition continues, and he finds that not only because of the opposition of the outsiders trying to kind of stop what's going on in Jerusalem, but just kind of some of the wickedness of the people of Jerusalem. They're like, look, and people in the land, they're like, we've been in famine. And so what we've done is we've been selling our sons and daughters as slaves, and we've been charging our kinsmen taxes. And so like the poor people are coming to Nehemiah and they're like, dude, I had to sell my son. I had to sell my daughter to one of the rich among us. And we're having to pay these taxes and we can't make ends meet. And Nehemiah gets outraged. And he says, what is this that you're doing, that you're exacting interest, and you're taking your kinsmen's sons and daughters as slaves? This shouldn't be so. And he was very angry. Nehemiah gets angry several times in the book of Nehemiah. And he took counsel with himself against the nobles, and he speaks to them and he rebukes them. And he says, by this, he goes, you're causing us to become a taunt, a mocking among the enemies of God. And so he says, you need to restore the people back to their lands. You need to restore their children back to them. You need to restore the provisions to them. And then Nehemiah goes on to say that he was being fair, that as a governor, he wasn't taking the full amount of money he was allowed to take as a governor. He was only taking what he needed for himself and the men under his care. And so again, there's a conspiracy against Nehemiah. They keep trying to kill him. They say, look, let's go hide in the temple. If you hide in the temple, you'll be safe. And he goes, no, I'm not going to go into the temple. He said, it's not for me to do that. It's not for me to sin. But they wanted to do that so they could accuse him of sin and they could bring his character into disrepute. And so in the book of Nehemiah, we see Ezra make an appearance again. Ezra reads from the book of the law, and he proclaims to them in the first day of the 7th month the hearing of the book of the law. And the people begin to follow God, and they celebrate the Feast of Booths again. And they do it in a way that has never been done since the days of Joshua. It doesn't mean, so let me give you an example. Josiah, for example, when the people of God haven't observed Passover for a long time, Josiah reinstitutes the Passover. But several kings after Josiah, you have King Hezekiah who reinstitutes the Passover, and it says, and he did it with kind of like an attention to detail. He did it in a way that it hadn't been done since the days of Moses, and so, or the days of Joshua. And so here they are, they're observing the Feast of Booths with incredible detail. In episode 209, this is the 24th day of the 7th month, and they're listening to the book of the law, probably still being read by Ezra. That's who's reading the book of the law a couple of weeks ago in their timeline. And one day before for us in Nehemiah 8, one chapter before, Ezra's reading them the book of the law. So they're listening to the book of the law for a quarter of the day, and then they're worshiping and they're grieving over their sins, repenting, confessing for another quarter of the day. And they had this long prayer where they remember kind of the history of their people based off of the law of the Lord that they've just read. And they're confessing their sin to God. And they're saying, God, restore us. And God, you are righteous and you are just and we are not. And then Nehemiah goes away for a little bit. He comes back to find out that Tobiah has moved into the temple. He comes back to find out that the Levites are not being given their daily portion. He comes back to find out that the Levites have abandoned the temple, and he whips everybody back into shape. And they're selling stuff on the Sabbath in Jerusalem. And he's like, look, don't come back on the Sabbath or I'm going to kick your butt. And he's pulling hair out of people's beards. And he's just like wrecking shop. Nehemiah was one, like, people are like, oh, you can't be firm. You got to be gentle with people. Nehemiah did not get that message. And I like it. I like that Nehemiah is just like, you know what? You guys are freaking idiots and you deserve to be beaten up if you're selling on the Sabbath, and you deserve to have all your house stuff thrown out of the temple because you don't belong here, and you deserve to have your beards ripped from your face. And like I said, Ezra handled it differently. Ezra fell down on the ground and wept and tore his own clothes and wept until nightfall while he's ripping his own beard out. Different strokes for different folks, right? And so I lean more towards Ezra in my own personal character, but every now and then I'm like, yeah, Nehemiah, right? So Nehemiah whips the people back into shape so that they can serve the Lord. Then we went back in time several decades to Zechariah, and Zechariah has incredible language. I love the prophecies of Zechariah. I love his use of numbers, and maybe it's just because I like numbers. I like math. I count everything. And so I love all this stuff where he's like, there were 4 of these and 4 of these and 7 of these and 2 of these in this vision that he's having. I love all the questions he asks. What does this mean, Lord? What does this mean, Lord? He's talking to the angel who's showing him these visions. What's this about? Who's that guy? What's going on over here? I love it. And so he is prophesying during the same time Haggai is prophesying, and the temple is being rebuilt by Zerubbabel and by Joshua the high priest. And then he starts to prophesy end times things. He starts to prophesy the destruction of the 4 nations that had come and decimated Jerusalem. And he starts to prophesy that Jerusalem will be measured and the walls of Jerusalem will be destroyed, not for warfare, but because Jerusalem's going to explode with population and blessing, and animals and nations will be coming to Jerusalem, and it will be so big that you'll have to tear down the wall to make room for everybody who's going to be in it. And God says, but don't worry when you tear down the wall. He says, because I will be the wall of fire around her. I will be the glory in her midst. And so that right there makes us know, oh, this is a spiritual Jerusalem. This is heavenly Jerusalem. This is the last days that Zechariah is seeing. And Zechariah sees these beautiful things. He sees a vision of the high priest, Joshua, standing before the Lord in filthy garments, and Satan accusing him. And he says, Satan, I rebuke you. This is one I have plucked from the fire. And he dresses him in party robes. And he says, this is a picture of my righteous branch who will come and he will make intercession for the people. And so there's just so much beauty in Zechariah. In Zechariah 4, he talks about the 2 witnesses that we see in Revelation 11. And so Zechariah, I am convinced, I'm not smart enough to understand it all, but I am convinced that the majority of Zechariah, outside maybe the first 2 chapters, the majority of Zechariah is pointing to these last days, has a lot of overlap with Revelation. And we'll see that some more in the coming days as we finish up Zechariah. But there's our summary for this week. Lots of minor prophets. I confused their names several times and called Ezra Ezekiel or Nehemiah Esther or whatever. My tongue got twisted, but hopefully you managed this week okay. And we're about to wrap up. We have one more week of the Old Testament, if you can believe that. So we have one more week of the Old Testament, and then we get to start the new. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible through another section of Scripture where we come to know and understand God a little bit better. Look, if you're brand new to Simpler Bible, we have all sorts of resources available for you. Go to our website, simplerbible.com, and there you can find these videos, you can find our podcast, you can find links to our social media, and you can even find a blog post with additional scriptures if you want to go into a little bit more study than we had time to cover in this podcast and video today. We hope that this tool will be exactly that for you, a tool. Not something that replaces your daily walk with God, but something that enhances your daily walk with God and helps you to know and enjoy Him more. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you again tomorrow.